Shalom, and welcome to the Parasha Club. I'm Rav Mordechai Rosenberg here with Rav Menachem Leibtag, and we are talking Torah together. This week we've got Parashat Shemini. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, it's time to learn.
Well, it's Chalamoid still when we're recording, but when you hear this, it'll be after Yom Tov already.
All right. So, Parashat Shemini is a parasha I love very much. It's my mitzvah parasha, and certainly, I think, the most fun parasha in Sefer Vayikra. Lots of action. We've got the finalization of the inauguration of the Mishkan. We've got the dramatic scene of the divine presence coming down to the Mishkan. We've got the tragic death of Aaron's two sons. We've got the aftermath of that story, which has got an interesting conflict between Moshe and Aaron. And then we've got laws of Kashrut and purity and impurity. So one of the things that affects most people's lives from our parasha is the laws of Kashrut. And a lot of people know that Jewish meat come from animals that have split hooves and chew their cud, kosher fish and fins and scales. But I was just wondering, is there any meaning to these kosher signs? Like, what do you see in them? Is there something that is more just than meets the eye here?
I guess part of being Jewish is keeping kosher and eating kosher meat and looking for kosher meat and paying double for kosher meat. So it's and I guess it's probably one of the biggest themes of Vayikra, because what I want to suggest is that our main connection to the world of korbanot is in eating meat. Why is that? Because we read last week in Parashat Tzav that any animal that could have been an offering, in other words, sheep and cattle, shon bakar, any animal that could have been a korban, the chelev and dam, the fat that surrounds the abdominal cavity, that would usually is offered on the altar when you bring a korban shlamim, and the blood that's sprinkled on the altar, that is forbidden for you to eat. Mm-hmm. And if you eat it, you're cut off from the covenant. You're chayv karet. It's called disor of chelev and dam. It means there's something covenantal and something like very basic about it. And the question is, what's so important about it? I want to suggest something that goes back to the theme of creation. And we had back in Sefer Bereshit, where man...
Because that idea of being cut off from the covenant for eating chaylev and dam is extreme. Like, that's a very extreme punishment.
Like when you desecrate the Sabbath day, or eating chametz, things like that. Right. Or not bringing Pesach, or not doing circumcision. That karet means you're cut off from the covenant. That's like really, really bad. Mm-hmm. So what's so important about it? So if I follow the theme about what we're allowed to eat, I'm sure people remember that in the story of creation, man was a herbivore, remember? And it seems like animals were as well. But when you look at day 6, remember day 6 had 2 acts of creation? God makes both man and animal on the same day on day 6, but a different act of creation. First, God says, let there be swarming animals. That's land animals, basically. And then he sees it's good. And then God says, let's make man in his image, and he makes man. And then God gives a diet to man and a diet for the animals. What's he tell man? What do you get to eat? You get to eat everything that I made on the second part of day 3. Means vegetation and fruit, what we call bird prey eitz and bird prey adama. Because you eat it's what grows from the trees and what grows from the ground. And animals, we're told, eat yerek esev. It's in chapter 1 in Bereshit, verses 29 and 30. In other words, God gives to the animals shrubbery, eat green, basically, yerek esev is, what do you call that in English? You get shrubbery, green grass, they graze basically. And humans get to eat fruit and vegetables. Again, and that's part of our day-to-day life. That's the blessings we make that differentiate between vegetables and fruit, which takes us back to the story of Gan Eden. What's that story about? God wants man to recognize, even though he's part of the animal kingdom, and you can't miss the fact that we're similar to animals, we're very different than animals, and that difference is our Tzelem Elokim. We're supposed to recognize that God made us different than the animal kingdom, even though we're similar. And that difference most likely has to do with our creativity and our ability to be creative and do good or do evil with our creativity. God wants us to be creative. We're supposed to work 6 days a week, but we have to reflect on our creativity because that's what God was doing every day of creation. And try our best to do good. Therefore, we need a day once a week to reflect. That's the whole theme of Shabbat and remembering the theme of creation. Now, after the flood, God enters this covenant with all humankind called the Rainbow Covenant. And right before that covenant, God tells man, again, to be fruitful and multiply, just like in day 6 of creation, but changes his diet, and now man can eat meat. But there's a
interesting. So it's like a new creation in the sense of not only has we're starting again with humanity after the flood, but we also have a replaying of the diet instruction, and it's new now that they're allowed to eat meat.
Yeah. Now, the fact that we eat meat, we're part of the animal kingdom. Animals eat other animals, we eat other animals. And that sort of puts us back into the animal kingdom. On the other hand, we're different than the animal kingdom. So it could be that God allows us to eat meat, but we need to do something to take that act of eating meat, to use it to remember we're not part of the animal kingdom.
So hold on, you're saying that the decision to allow Noach and his descendants to eat meat is like a concession that is a little bit less like Tselem Elokim. Like it makes us more animalistic, is what you're saying. Because animals eat one another, so we are now like becoming more animalistic. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. If I want to give an analogy from school, like you failed, I'm putting you down a grade so you can move up a grade. You know what I'm saying? I have to bring you down a level to enable you to get back to where you should be. But we started you up too high.
Okay.
So now, man basically his nature is he eats meat. He's a carnivore. That's most humans are that way. But eating meat might lead you to be part of the animal kingdom, to act like the animals as well. But we do eat animals, but I can use the act of eating an animal to remind myself that I'm different than an animal. Now, the key phrase that Chumash uses is when he gives in day 1, in chapter 1 and day 6, humans get, again, fruit and vegetables. Animals get yerek esef. In chapter 9 in Breshit, when God gives man the right to eat animals, he compares it like yerek esef, which is like, grass. Now, when you look at physically what's happening, what enables animals, like the herbivores, what enables them to eat grass? They have an extra stomach. So they can eat the grass, they can chew it. We can't, but they can. But they have an extra stomach, and therefore they chew their cud and then eat it and goes to the next stomach. And that's how they process and get the protein from eating the grass. We can't do that. The animals do it for us. What did man do with his ingenuity, with his creativity? He came up with this great idea to domesticate animals. And therefore, sheep and cattle, what they do for us basically, they become our extra stomach. They eat the shrubbery, they digest it, eat it, they get big and fat. Then we shech them, we kill them, and we eat them. We cook them and eat them. And that enables us to eat shrubbery. So it's a great human invention called the domestication of animals. In fact, in anthropology, that's pretty much when human civilization begins. When we domesticate animals and domesticate wheat, we make a business out of it. And then that changes our whole lifestyle. And our whole, basically, civilization begins with that. And that's why it's not by chance that the first 2 professions are Cain and Hevel. One's a farmer and one's a shepherd. And then we use now, of all the things, the lamb is special because we get clothing from the lamb, which also makes us different than animals. That's why it's the Korban Tamid every day. So when I eat an animal, I can use the act of eating an animal to remind myself of my Tselem Elokim. I need to do something symbolic. So ideally in Sefer Vayikra, we'll see in chapter 17, it tells you if you can eat an animal, it has to be a sacrifice, a Korban Shlamim. You can't eat an animal just like that. If I can eat an animal, I have to give a symbolic portion to God. I'll give God the chelev and sprinkle the blood.
So theoretically, in an ideal sense, and in the desert, actually, every single time we eat meat, it has to be a Korban Shlamim.
And then in Sefer Devarim, we're told that when we come to the land of Israel, also it should be a sacrifice. But if the place of worship is too far away, it's called Basar Tava, then it's okay to eat outside the temple. But anything that would have gone on the altar, the chaylev and the dam, is forbidden to eat. That's called what we call kosher meat. So basically, what we do with what's kosher meat, we shecht it the same way you would shecht the korban. The same laws of shechita apply, of slaughtering the animal. Whatever would have gone on the altar, which is the chaylev, like the fat again around the abdominal cavity connected to the kidneys, is forbidden to eat. And the blood that should be sprinkled on the altar, the blood that comes out, when you slaughter it, that comes out right away, that blood is forbidden as well. So by not eating that blood and not eating that chaylev, I'm reminding myself of thanking God for the fact I'm different than part of the animal kingdom, even though I'm actually part of it. At the same time, I'm using my creativity to use it in the service of God. So that symbolic act, I think, is very meaningful. Now, nowadays, we just look for the OU or the stamp that says kosher on it or whatever kashrut you go by. So, and we're not farmers and we're not shepherds, so we don't go around shechting the animals. We keep that far away from us. We have it all packaged. So it's hard to apply that and appreciate that nowadays. But I think that's the background to kosher meat, why it's so important.
Fascinating. So I feel like you've given an amazing explanation of why we need animals to chew their cud. Because we initially only ate vegetation that was different to animals, as in we ate fruit and vegetables, We ate fruit and vegetables. Animals ate the grass and also each other, but we didn't. And after the flood, when we're recreated, we get permission to eat meat, and then we need to have some kind of reminder about telling Elohim if we're, let's say, less Elohim, we're less godly, because we're eating animals. So we need to remind ourselves to not eat the chaylev and the dam, the fats and the blood, and give that to God. And so therefore, ideally that should be a korban shlamim, but that actually enables us then to take advantage of that extra stomach of the animals and then eat the grass vicariously, so to speak, through them. Do you have a explanation also of how that fits in with the split hooves?
I heard one time that maybe the split hooves enable the animal to hang on to either to run away faster from to protect themselves because they're grazing, or it could be enables them to climb up along the hills and get more access to the shrubbery or something like that. But that's
interesting.
I have less of a theory on.
I see. I did see a documentary about goats that can climb mountain faces because of this.
It enables them to graze and also to protect themselves, but has to go into how animals developed.
Interesting. Okay. Is there a connection then between the kashrut stuff and the stuff that comes before, the whole drama about Moshe and Aharon, the finishing off of the Mishkan? It seems almost like it's coming out of left field. We've just been talking about korbanot for ages, since for the first three, no, at least 2.5 parashiyot of the Torah, it's been the whole topic has been korbanot, and it's been quite seemingly distant from most of us, and then all of a sudden it's right up our alley with korbanot. Is there a connection between the korbanot?
In general,
and
you
kashrut?
need something on a daily basis to remind you of your connection to God. Mm-hmm. Part of being Jewish, part of being human, is being alive, being creative, is God being in your life. Therefore, you need mitzvot. You need ritual. Without that, there's no religion. You need that constant reminder. And therefore, mitzvot are symbolic acts to remind me of my connection to God or my purpose of my life. So I need to do something. And it makes sense that there's special mitzvot that relate to eating meat and raising cattle and food. When we make brachot, we make blessings. We differentiate between, again, vegetables and fruit that reminds us of the story of creation. We make special laws about when we eat meat and how we slaughter meat. By the way, for all humankind, you can't eat animals alive. And then right away, God tells us you can't kill another human. You can't, even though you can kill an animal, you can't kill another human. Mm-hmm. And then as the Jewish people, we have, we take it a step farther with the know, about eating blood and the fat around the animal, the chelev, because it should be a sacrifice. But that bringing that sacrifice, or like doing something special with your meat, reminds you need mitzvot all day long, on a regular basis, to make sure you're in contact. And therefore, if I don't have that mitzvah, I'll find another mitzvah. But you'll never have Jewish life without being surrounded by halacha. And in rabbinic law, if we're no longer shepherds and things, we'll find something else to do. But you need mitzvot all day long. It's brachot are part of that. Keeping kosher, and then it's just part of our Jewish life. So the idea of when you come to the temple, you did something symbolic that reminded you how you have to behave when you get back to your home. So we don't have a temple, but we still eat meat. So I do something symbolic when I slaughter an animal to eat it. But it's very similar to the act of bringing a sacrifice.
Right.
Now,
this might be a massive
the shlamim. What's important is the shlamim is the very beginning of our parsha. Now, a shlamim, called a peace offering, is what we found at Mount Sinai, where God gets his section, the priests get their part, and the owner eats the animal. It's like it's called. We're a team working together. Like when you're involved with someone, you go out to eat, you share a meal together. So sharing a meal with God reminds you of your partnership. Remember, you're an employee working with God, and you're happy who your boss is and what you're doing. During the 7 days of Miluim, which was in the previous parsha, was every day the Kohanim brought a chatat olah. We talked about that before as preparation, and a shlamim, a prototype shlamim. On Yom HaShmini, on the 8th day, Aharon brings this chatat olah, but the people bring a chatat olah shlamim. Now, and that inaugurates the people into the service of God. But the act of bringing a shlamim reminds you of what happened at Har Sinai. Happened at Har Sinai was our commitment to be God's people, accepting the yoke of heaven and being a nation representing God. And therefore, I can take the day-to-day mundane act of eating an animal and having a meal and use it to remind myself of my commitment to be God's people. But the idea of kosher meat relates to the shlamim. And that's obvious in Sefer Vayikra. Talked about that before. And if on Yom HaShmini, the nation of Israel brings a shlamim, which again, remember, in the future, it's only going to be once a year on the holiday of Shavuot, with the Shtei Alechem. Remember, it's so beautiful where what makes man unique from animal. Remember when man domesticates wheat and animals, that's when civilization begins. On Shavuot, we take the chita, the wheat, make two breads from the new wheat, and we present it and wave it together with the korban shlamim of two kvasim, two lambs, and that's the reminder. That's on the anniversary of the day of Matan Torah, again going together with our grain harvest holiday. And I think those two ideas, which are human, that's when civilization began. I think that's pretty cool. Meaningful.
That's really cool. So on Shavuot, we bring the two shtei alechem, 2 loaves of bread, and 2 shlamim.
Two kifsei atzeret, they're called.
Right, and those are the two
emblems them together,
of what it means to be human, and to domesticate wheat, to domesticate
and use your creativity in your human life to be in the service of God, which was our commitment we made at Har Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
Again, how you apply that commitment, how do you apply it in every generation, that has to do with hashkafa. But the idea of living a life of commitment to God and serving God as a people and dedicating your life to that. So I need constant reminders of that commitment.
Yeah.
Now, once you remind that commitment, how that affects your day-to-day life, that's part of your Judaism.
Nice. And so going back to that previous point, Kashrut reminds us of the korban shlamim, because we need to treat our animal like a shlamim, except we don't always bring those certain bits. That shlamim is like what they did at the Chanukah Mishkan, where all of us committed to being the kingdom of priests, and that reminds us of Har Sinai, which is where we committed to doing that.
So from a technical point of view, in the beginning of these parshas, the first Aliyah, Moshe tells Aharon and the people, here's the special offering you bring. Hashem, here's what God commanded. God's glory will appear upon you. Now, the previous time we had the word Kvod Hashem, God's glory, was at Har Sinai, when Moshe goes up for the first 40 days in the end of chapter 24 in Shemot. It says, Vayishkon Kvod Hashem Har Sinai, V'achasteu nan shesh yamim. Remember, God's glory stood on Har Sinai, chapter 24, I think, verse 15, 16. When Moshe goes up for the first 40 days to receive more laws about how to be God's people. And therefore, we lost Kvod Hashem with the sin of the golden calf. Now that we've learned our lesson, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we prove to God that we can learn from our mistakes, and we build our Mishkan, etc. God's willing to forgive us. Now, this is a special korban we bring. So the idea of a shlamim we had in Har Sinai, Kvod Hashem we had in Har Sinai, and now I want to rebuild that Kvod Hashem from Har Sinai and have it back in, that's going to be a special day on Yom HaShmini. And then we bring again a shlamim from, now on this day, the olah, which is usually a par, is going to be an egel, and then they were bringing a short and aisle for shlamim, without getting into the details of different animals, but they're all very significant actions that can remind us of our commitment to God.
Now, I do want
to go back to Brit Bein HaBetarim. Remember, Brit Bein HaBetarim, the animals that Aharon slices in half, or the animals that later become korbanot. Rashi points that out. Remember, B'zchut HaKorbanot, God watches our history. That's a bit, so if we had time, we'd go into the meaning of each animal, what it represents, and what stories it reminds us of.
Okay, you got me really curious now. Go on. What animals does Abraham bring? What are the symbols? What do they symbolize? Where do they show up in the korbanot?
Remember, actually, there's the egel mushuleshet. Remember, an aisle, okay, and a toran goes out, etc. There's the, and then he cuts them in half and walks through the parts.
Yeah,
and that's the first time there's a dialogue between God and Avraham Avinu. It's the first time there's a covenant, and the idea of covenant, the idea of Brit, takes us right to Har Sinai. Remember, God took us out of Egypt in order to be to be His God, for He to be our God, we to be His people. The idea that you're committed as a Jew, and that's your Jewish life of commitment, and serving God in your day-to-day life, that's central to your Judaism. You need to do things to remind you of that all the time. And that's the role of mitzvot.
I've just been thinking about the Brit Bein HaBetarim over Pesach, because, we say V'hisha Amda, talking about the Brit between the Brit Bein HaBetarim.
You got to watch our history.
But hold on. From what I remember of the Brit Bein HaBetarim, maybe I'm wrong, but from what I remember of the Brit Bein HaBetarim, the point of it was that, we'll go down to Egypt, be slaves there, we'll come out, and we'll leave Mitzrayim and go to Israel. And, we'll serve Hashem in Israel. But we say, V'hisham de lavotenu v'lanu, in every generation we're protected by the Brit Bein HaBetarim. How are we protected how is it v'lanu? How is it in every generation? And how is it all about, all of history? Isn't it
That's
just
the question. It's God promising a one-time get out of Egypt card. There's a classic thing with the father-in-law. Here's $1 million, start a business. I don't want to see you again. Don't come begging me. I'll get you started in business, but don't come and ask for a loan again. Right. Now, I can look at Brit Bein HaBetarim as, I'll get you started. I'll get your nation started. Then you're on your own. I made a promise to Abraham, and that's it. Or God's saying, I'm always going to be there forever and watching your history. I'm always watching over your history. And sometimes I might have to punish you, and you might go into trouble, and you might go into exile. But always be there, your goal, your destiny, to be a nation representing God is eternal. And no matter how bad things get, you're always God's people. That's one of the biggest prophetic themes. That we talk about it in davening in the morning in Zachar lo olam brito. God remembers His covenant forever. It's an eternal covenant. And you should never think, no matter how bad Jewish history is, it's over. Now, again, we might be in exile, we might be suffering, but there's always a chance of return. Now, will God redeem us? He always can. We have to be worthy of that redemption. So remembering that God can redeem is super important. That's v'hisham da lavotenu. But more important, or just as important, is remembering, even though He can redeem us, we have to be worthy of His redemption. So knowing we can be redeemed, but we have to be worthy of redemption, should motivate us to keep His Torah properly.
Although, arguably, were we so worthy of redemption in Mitzrayim? Like we say...
So the first time around, we had a good excuse, because we went through such slavery.
Right.
That's what Chumash talks about. But now, future generations, then God gets really upset. That's why we go into exile, and that's what all the prophets talk about in the end of the first temple period. We didn't fulfill our goal, and
Right.
but people thought we just read dry bones on Shabbat Chalamod. Remember in Yechezkel, the people think it's over. It's an irreversible process. No, God says these dry bones can come back to life. Means there's recovery. Recovery is possible, but again, you have to be worthy of it. In fact, then he uses all this imagery from the book of Vayikra. That I'll bring you back, but I'll give a ruach hadasha. I'll cleanse you. I'll put you through a cleansing process. Even though you're not worthy, I'll bring you back, but then you have to make yourself worthy.
Right. We have to make ourselves worthy. Very important. All right. So we went on a bit of a tangent talking about Brit Bein HaBetarim because we have all the animals. The animals of the Brit Bein HaBetarim are the korbanot. The egel, the ayil, and birds.
The birds also,
Torah goes out.
Yeah.
Right. And those you're saying are present in the Brit Bein HaBetarim because of their
It could be. I
presence
mean,
here.
Rashi points that out that it is b'schut hakorbanot. It doesn't mean God needs to be fed. It means doing symbolic acts to remind you of the idea of commitment. So you're always praying to God to watch your history, but knowing God can be involved in your history begins your involvement. But knowing that He can, but you have to be worthy of His help, that affects your behavior. That's as opposed to giving up hope and saying, there's no more connection between man and God.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, I really wanted to ask you about this whole Vayera love Kvod Hashem, the idea that God is going to appear, because there's this whole scene at the end of all this korbanot that I brought at the the inauguration ceremony, where Aaron has finished all the korbanot he's supposed to bring. Moshe said, "This is what you should do, and the glory of God will appear to you." And Aaron does it all, and then he blesses the people, and still the glory of God doesn't appear. So he finishes everything, and then he goes down. And only then does Moshe come in, and they both go back into the Mishkan, and then the glory of God appears. And there's this I find very dramatic and entertaining Rashi that explains that Aaron was very upset. Moshe, he feels like Moshe set him up to fail. That he said this is what's going to happen, and glory of God will appear. And
remember, the whole nation is watching. The whole nation gathered at the front of Moed, waiting for the Shekhina to return. Moshe promised them, "Look, everyone gather. Here's what we do, and Kvod Hashem is going to come, and it's not coming." So
it's pretty high stakes
because it doesn't work.
Yeah, because the glory of God supposedly has left since the golden calf story, and they built this whole Mishkan in order to bring it back, and they've done everything they're supposed to do, and it's not coming back. And then when Moshe chips in, then it works. But it should have worked with just Aaron following Moshe's instructions, shouldn't it?
Well, that's one way to read it. But the verse that Rashi comments on is that after Aaron goes down from doing everything he was commanded to do, it says, "Vayavo Moshe Aaron el Moed vayitzu." Moshe and Aaron come into the Moed and they go out, and then Kvod Hashem comes and eats up the korbanot, etc. Kvod Hashem only appears after Moshe and Aaron enter the Moed. So watch the bother. What did they do? So they went into daven for the Shekhina to come down. Remember, Yiratzon shetishrei Shekhina b'masei.
Yeah.
Hopefully God let God's glory should dwell on him. I think at a pshat level, maybe I'm wrong. Not that disagreeing with Rashi, just maybe a different angle, is that we don't want to think that doing this hocus pocus korbanot is going to bring God's Shekhina to come to you. Rather, I need to go and daven. You follow? It's the same thing we've been talking about. There's a need for ritual, but there's a need to apply that ritual to prayer. And prayer, again, reminding you of your connection. What's the danger of ritual all the time? It becomes something magical, or something mystical, instead of something logical. So if I follow Chazal, why did Moshe Aaron go into daven? Whatever they daven, that's a different question. But the people have to see that it's not the hocus pocus that's going to bring the Shekhina. It's not the korbanot, but it's rather Moshe and Aaron going into the Ol Moed, reliving Moshe going to Har Sinai again, to the top of the mountain, to get the luchot and make that commitment for the people and receive the Torah. And there, remember, even the Birkat Kohanim is the same idea of teaching Torah to the people. Remember, the God should bless you, and the job of the Kohanim will be to teach Torah. So I think that the fact that Moshe and Aaron go in and they leave, and that's the last thing that people say, then the Shekhina comes, that's the most important. The fact that they're able to go into the Ol Moed, encounter God, and come out alive, and come out. And people are like, what did they do? So they say, of course, they davened. So what did they daven, you fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important that for the Shekhina to come in, there needs to be an encounter with man and God with prayer. Mm-hmm. Now, again, it's a beautiful balance between the need for ritual at the same time the need for prayer. We do the same thing in our day-to-day lives.
I mean, prayer itself can be,
but you daven with talis, with tefillin, with saying these words, with that words, with the Sefer Torah. There's all the laws that come with it, but they're all going to be important.
Right.
But there's always there's a danger whenever you have ritual that the ritual becomes a religion. Don't do this. Now, the example I'd like to give, God isn't saying whenever you want the Shekhina to come, make a meal and he'll come. You're from South. I thought you're from England, but you're part of the Commonwealth in Australia.
Australia. Yeah.
But if the Queen is coming to your house for dinner, I mean, if the Queen is coming to your house to visit, you'll make a nice meal, right? But if you make a nice meal, that won't bring the Queen to your house.
Right.
I hope that's clear. Making a nice meal won't bring the Queen to your house. Right. But if the Queen's coming to your house, of course you have to prepare a nice meal. But to show that you appreciate her coming, and she's not coming to eat, she's coming to meet you. Because I guess you're an important person. Right. So if God's going to meet the people, we have to do something to show we want him to be with us. But making that meal isn't going to bring the Shekhina. Now that because the Shekhina is coming, I need to do something symbolic to show we're ready for the Shekhina to come to us. So that's how I understand what Moshe is saying. Here's what we need to do. Because today God is going to bring a Shekhina back, we have to show we're ready for it. And that's what we do every year on Yom Kippur. We did on Yom HaShemini, it becomes our yearly Korban on Yom Kippur. We're going to relive this every year on Yom Kippur, the very same set of Korbanot. But that's the topic for Parashat Acharimo already.
Interesting. So I really love that. The idea that the whole point here is that there has to be a break between the ritual and God's presence being revealed, because it tells us it's not about the ritual, ultimately. Hashem will come when you're sincere and when you call out to him in sincerity, in tefillah, and the ritual comes to serve that. It doesn't come to be instead of it.
What do Chazal say? Chazal say tefillah replaces korbanot. But tefillah can have the same problem because it becomes a ritual as well.
Right.
So I can take that same idea. No, the main idea is that tefillah, the rituals we do in tefillah, are to make sure that we have what's called proper kavanah, proper intentions, and an understanding. But the understanding, the havanah, not just the kavanah, but the havanah, the understanding of tefillah, to remind us of our connection to God, what it means to serve God, that's going to be key. But you need that balance all the time between the ritual you keep, the mitzvot you're keeping, and the effect it has on our day-to-day life.
See, I have heard that idea that tefillah replaces korbanot like 1,000 times, but I have never made that connection, that actually korbanot is supposed to be accompanied by tefillah always, and actually they're always like primary, and the korbanot are kind of like the meal that you serve when the queen comes to visit. But the reason they're coming is to talk to you. They're not coming for the meal. Yeah. And the tefillah is the conversation, and the korbanot are the meal. And so to say that like we lost the korbanot because maybe we overemphasized their role and not the sincere conversation.
That's what all the prophets of destruction. That's what read Isaiah, read Jeremiah. That's all they talk about. Micha.
Yeah. And then for the rabbis to come in along and say, okay, well, now we don't have korbanot, what do we replace it with? Replace it with tefillah. That takes on a whole new dimension now. That's really cool. All right, last question. There are some that look at this whole scene of Moshe and Aaron and just, the delayed appearance of the Shekhina and see that as see a connection between what happens immediately afterwards with Nadav and Avihu, and sees their and see this what happened to their father, and he did everything he was told, and the Shekhina didn't appear. So maybe doing what you're told isn't so great. Maybe we can bring our own fire, and that'll be good. What do you see as the motivation for Nadav and Avihu to do what they
I'll
did?
say what Chumash says. What they did is something God didn't command them to do. They brought Asher Lo Tziva Otam. If you remember all Parsha V'Yaakov Kudei,
Yeah.
Mishkan Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. Everything during the 7 days of Miluim, Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. Everything in this week's part in Shemini, over and over again, the same phrase as God has commanded Moshe Rabbeinu. When it comes to the temple, follow protocol. Don't change things.
Right.
Don't take initiative. Now, sometimes you need to take initiative, but when that initiative makes sense, it's logical. If your initiative you're taking is you want to be the center of attention, so what happens? So everything's happening. Oh, hey, we don't have a part in the play. Now, by the way, on the very same day, the 12 princes, they also took an initiative. They bought wagons for the Levites. They donated a kiddush for the whole nation. They brought vessels to help the Levim and the Kohanim in their service. Now, they took an initiative on their own and did something, without God commanding it. And God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, remember in chapter 7 in Bamidbar, take it. That's a good idea because they're doing something for other people, not for themselves. When you're in the middle of this ritual service, right? And God says in the beginning, here's the protocol, follow this protocol and don't change it. Here's what God commanded because God wants to teach you. Sometimes you have to follow the protocol, and they go do something on their own, not to help anybody else, but just for their own sake. That's what made God angry. Because Asher, now, what exactly they did wrong? The fact there's 4 or 5 different answers in Chazal tell you that there's something wrong with their attitude. Remember, they're giving laws in front of the rabbi. They're getting drunk. They're not wanting to have children. They're all doing things that relate to a bit of maybe haughtiness and things like that, thinking too much of themselves. Now, what's interesting at the end of the parsha, when it happens, Aaron's aghast by Dom Aharon. Sometimes silence. Tragedies happen. Sometimes you have to accept them, even though you don't understand them. But later on, what happens? There's an argument over should they eat meat on that day. No, some eat, some you don't eat. But Moshe gets angry and says, "How come you ate that korban?" And Aaron tells him, "Listen, after such a tragedy, is this the right thing to do to overeat on that day?" No, but they're arguing on what principle. That's balanced between what principle? Doing what's right in the eyes of God, Tov Yashar B'nei Hashem, and doing what God commanded to do. So sometimes God commands things, but you have to say, no, this doesn't make sense in a certain situation. And sometimes when you're changing things, it has to be for a good reason. So when Nadav and Avihu change things, it's not for a good reason. It's more relates to their haughtiness. When Aharon makes his own decision not to eat the korban, it's coming from a place that this is the right thing to do. So that when you're making changes, the motivation has to be what's called the Shem Shemaim, and not for my gold, not for my greatness. I want to look good in all this. I want to do the right thing to do because it makes sense. And it's beautiful where Aharon says, Moshe gets angry and Aharon says, would it be right to eat? And how's it end? Vayishma Moshe vayta beinav. You know what? My brother's right. It's okay to have good arguments, but both Moshe and Aharon want to do the right thing, and therefore our goal in life is always what's the right thing to do. Now, in trying to do the right thing, you can argue, and through that argument, sometimes you reach the right point. But you have to listen to each other. Sometimes there's a need for change. Sometimes you need not to change. And I think that reflects our arguments we have all the time in our community. What type of reform is good, what type isn't good. So it's healthy to always want to do the right thing. And when the road of halacha sometimes brings a situation where this doesn't seem right, but simply no, but that's what we have to do. Having a healthy, mature argument. And that's where you have to understand your principles. And then that you need rabbinic leadership and decision. But the motivation can't be, I want to do something new that no one ever did before. It's all about me. It's all about God and our relationship with God. And you have to understand principles. And that's why we need rabbinic leadership to make those decisions. It has to be done in unity at the communal level without getting into all the politics behind things like that. But I think we can learn from Vayikra and Bamidbar. Sometimes initiatives are good and they're necessary. Remember, Pesach Sheni coming up, our landing tomorrow morning. An initiative that God says is a good idea. later on. Some initiatives are pretty bad.
It's a very, that answer really rings true. It's tough. It's tough to swallow, because it's so hard to know when it's right. Checking your motivations. Am I doing this for others, or am I doing this for myself? Is this what God commanded, or is it what I think God really wants, even though we didn't command it? It's a tough balance to strike, but I suppose, yeah.
It needs conversation and understanding, and that's what you have Moshe and Aaron doing together.
Yeah.
These beautiful Moshe and Aaron going together to Lamawait and come out. Then Moshe gets angry. Aaron gives an answer. One time Moshe says something, and Aaron Vaidom Aaron. He had nothing to say. He's aghast, but he accepts it. And then later he still argues, and this time Moshe accepts what he says. Anyway, God should give us guidance to do the right thing when we're in difficult situations like we face almost every day in the last couple of weeks, last couple of years, last century.
Yeah.
And that's what davening's about also.
Amen. Thank you so much, Rav Leibtag. You've given us so many great ideas to think about, and you've helped me understand my Bnei Parasha a completely new way, so I really appreciate that. And to everybody else, wishing everyone a safe and wonderful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.
Wishing you a happy birthday.
Thank you as well. And please like, subscribe, share with your friends, and wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom.